Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and today we're on the battle for Azeroth beta. Gonna be discussing the new Unholy Death Knight changes that are gonna be heading our way very soon. I don't know if this is tomorrow or if it's gonna be implemented next week, so we're gonna have to go ahead and wait and see. But I can't believe how extreme some of these changes are, because the devs stated that there were only going to be minor changes to these specs, and at this point there was a whole shift in basically gameplay for Unholy DK, and it seems that rotations and things like that are going to be switching up quite a bit after viewing a lot of these talents and how these talents are going to be changed up. So let's jump into this.
But it's alright, 'cause right now we're frozen.
Walk again, mistakes that help me make. It's better to be broken than to break.
So let's go ahead and take a look at the Unholy talents and how they've changed or going to be changed here on the beta. As for the level 56 talents, we got Ebon Fever, Bursting Swords, and Will to Serve. We'll go into a little bit more detail on talents and things a little bit more later on in the video, go a little bit more in depth into it. As for what they're changing into, the level 56 talents is going to be Infected Claws, Will to Serve, and Clawing Shadows. As we can see right there, just the fact that Clawing Shadows is in that talent tree, just in that top row, it's going to change a couple of the other sections as well. As for the level 57 talents, currently we got Pestilent Pustules, Epidemic, and Blighted Rune Weapon. As for the new level 57 talents, we got Pestilent Pustules, Inevitable Doom, and Soul Reaper, which is very odd to see Soul Reaper up there in the level 57 category. As for the current level 58 talents, we got Unholy Frenzy, we got Castigator, and we got Clawing Shadows. For the new 58 category, we got Bursting Swords, Ebon Fever, and Unholy Blight. As for the level 60 talents on current, we got Debilitating Infestation, we got Sledge Belcher, and we got Asphyxiate. As for the new ones, we got level 60, we got Debilitating Infestation. Oh, these names are just crazy. We got Death's Reach, and we got Asphyxiate. We'll talk a little bit more later on what Death's Reach is and go in a little bit more in depth on that ability. As for the level 75 talents, we got Lingering Apparition on current, we got Spell Eater, and we got some Corpse Shield. Now that's going to be something that might frustrate some people, but also make a lot of people happy. We'll have to see how, I guess, you guys react to that. Let me know down in the comments below once you hear this, how you're going to react to it. Level 75 new talents, we got Spell Eater, Wraithwalk, and Death Pact. Death Pact is back for Unholy. Oh boy, the super heal for Unholy is definitely back. That's going to be interesting to see going on right now. As for the level 90 talents on current, we got Shadow Infusion, Necrosis, and Infected Claws, which is now being replaced in the level 90 talents with Corpse Explosion. New talent, we get to blow up some corpses. That's going to be pretty cool. I mean, we'll have to see, because if you pop Army and of course you pop Apocalypse, which is now baseline in the spec, yeah, Apocalypse is coming, guys. All right. It's got to be some pretty crazy AoE. I mean, Corpse Explosion, as we saw in the past, can be just huge damage going on. As for the level 100 talents, it's actually changing quite a bit. As for the level 100 talent, Dark Arbiter on current, we also got Defile, we got Soul Reaper on current. As for the new, we got Darken Fusion, Unholy Frenzy, and Summon Gargoyle. So now that we've kind of gone over the talents, I think we've got a pretty good understanding that a lot of stuff is going to be changing, and not just with major talents. A lot of the abilities that we use on a regular basis, smaller abilities, stuff we usually don't think about, is going to be changing quite a bit also, such as Death Coil. Used to cost 45 runic power, is now going to be converted down to only costing 40 runic power. And also reduces our Dark Transformation cooldown by 1 second based on every Death Coil that you use. And kind of on the sadder side of things, Dark Transformation is going from a 20-second lasting ability down to a 15-second lasting ability, but can be spec'd into another talent to raise it back up to 5 seconds. But who knows if we'll use that talent or whether or not that talent's going to be the best way to go. As for the Sledge Belcher, it looks like Sledge Belcher is actually being removed and is being replaced with Death's Reach. And the reason why that's being removed is Raised Dead now summons an Abomination instead of a Ghoul, kind of like a baseline talent. You just get an Abomination as soon as you hit that button, and you don't even have to look at that goofy Ghoul anymore if you don't want to. As for other things going on, it looks like Festering Wounds is now being reduced to 2 to 3 wounds on the target when procced, down from 2 to 4. And the reason being is they also reduced the wound cap on targets to 6 instead of 8. They felt like 8 was a little bit too many, and they really want to reduce that, make the DPS and the damage overall a little more fluent. I could definitely see him doing that. Blighted Rune weapon is now being replaced by Soul Reaper. Apparently they wanted to take out a lot of the Unholy RNG and kind of give more solidified talents that Unholy DKs could take to deal their DPS over and over again. As for Castigator, it is now replaced by Ebon Fever. As we saw with the changing over of talents, a lot of the things kind of got moved around or replaced. They apparently just wanted to put them in a little bit better places. As for Epidemic, now this is something that I'm pretty stoked for to see how Epidemic works out, because it now costs 30 runic power to use Epidemic instead of runes. Now you have an AoE usable on your runic power as Unholy. Think about that. Think about how fluent that rotation is going to be, especially when there's multiple targets, especially considering there's a ton of AoE right now in the battle for Azeroth beta, and that just really makes Unholy pretty strong in my opinion. That's going to be really awesome to see and really awesome to test out as soon as they implement that in. It's going to be one of the first things I look into. And also the ability is scaling off of AP. It's going from 16.3% AP scaling to 20%, and the targets near the ability is going to be buffed up from 3.4% up to 8%, and that's quite a big buff in terms of AoE damage coming from Epidemic, because before on the Battle for Azeroth Alpha it wasn't doing too great, but those damage buffs obviously are going to change a few things, and the fact that we can use that as a runic dump instead of just being an AoE that we have to use runes instead of, you know, using our Clawing Shadows. As for the next thing we're going to talk about is Apocalypse. Guys, Apocalypse is back. You guys got what you wanted for Unholy DKs. Look at that. You got your Apocalypse. That means you're going to have another major cooldown to proc on boss fights, shorter fights, things like that. And also, since it's only a 1.5 minute cooldown, you'll be able to use it quite a few times on trash in between boss fights, which is going to give us a bit more of a peak in DPS. Pretty happy to see that coming back. That needed to come back. Just the fact that Army of the Dead was on a 10-minute cooldown. We had okay DPS when we had Army of the Dead up single target, but without Army of the Dead, it was kind of mediocre. But definitely looking better. And Army of the Dead is also going from an 8-minute or a 10-minute cooldown down to an 8-minute cooldown, which we'll be able to pop that a little more between boss fights, obviously, especially when there's higher mythic pluses and things like that. When you have a little bit more time between bosses, you should be able to pop it maybe 1 or 2 more times within a dungeon. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how long the dungeons are, I guess. But that's an okay change, but the kind of downside to that change is the fact that it's going from lasting 40 seconds down to 30 seconds, which is kind of a give and take, because if you're running Corpse Explosion and those ads die sooner, you can probably explode them sooner, dealing a lot of burst AoE pressure. But we'll kind of have to see how that works out, obviously, when we can test it. And it looks like the next thing is Corpse Explosion, 15 seconds. It's a 15-second cooldown for AoE, so if you're downing ads one after another, you could probably blow them up on a pretty regular basis and deal quite a bit of AoE pressure, determining how much damage it's actually going to do. So that's something we got to kind of look at, and I'm very curious to see what's going on there. As for Bursting Swords, it looks like they're scaling down the AP benefit that it used to give. It was 50%, and they're nerfing it down to 25%. But that's just raw damage. But the AP scaling is going from 14.7% up to 20%. So based on our attack power is going to make that ability better, but they also nerf down the raw damage, probably to balance out the talent a little better, so it's not a little bit too strong for the current build that they're trying to run, because obviously Unholy DKs are getting a lot of AoE pressure with the runic dump into Epidemic instead of just relying on pure runes. As for Clawing Shadows, it did 27.8% AP scaling with a bunch of random numbers afterwards, but we're just going to round that to we're just going to keep that at 0.08. It's going to be buffed up to 30% AP scaling, which is going to make the ability do quite a bit more damage, especially since the fact that Defile causes that ability to cleave the closest targets. Obviously it's going to deal quite a bit more pressure when there's multiple targets with, you know, a 3% AP buff. One thing this I was kind of talking about in the beginning is going to be Death Pact, whether or not a lot of people are going to be mad about, since Death Pact is now replacing Corpse Shield. I mean, obviously it's going to be better so you don't kill your corpse, but you'll probably kill it anyways since it's Death Pact. But I mean, we'll have to see what's going on with that ability. It's kind of like a shield replacement for a heal. I don't know about that, but maybe it's needed. Maybe it's needed. We'll have to see. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about losing Corpse Shield for Death Pact. I really want to know. I'm kind of on the fence about it. I really don't know how to feel about it. And if you're wondering how Death Pact is going to work, it's going to be a 50% maximum health heal and absorbs 30% of healing of your maximum health after the use, kind of like it used to be. It doesn't speculate that it sacrifices your ghoul, but obviously it used to, so we can kind of assume it does. Maybe it doesn't. I'm not really 100% sure, but we'll have to go ahead and see once they implement it later on. Now, Dark Arbiter obviously is going to be replaced by Darken Fusion, as we saw from the talents. But it's also replaced by Gargoyle, which basically is an Arbiter now. They just wanted to change the look, but the fact that Gargoyle is not going to be a baseline talent, you now have to spec into it. I'm kind of wondering if Gargoyle is still a baseline talent, and that ability just lets you add to its DPS, but we'll really have to see, because it said nowhere that Gargoyle was being taken out or they were getting rid of the regular Gargoyle talent. So we'll really have to see what's going on with that a little bit later. Kind of curious how that one's going to work out. And of course, we got Death's Reach, which Death's Reach is kind of interesting. That's the one that's replacing Sledge Butcher, and it increases the range on Death Grip by 5 yards, and killing an enemy that yields experience or honor reduces or resets the cooldown of Death Grip, which could be fairly handy for, I mean, I guess dungeons if you really needed to pull things around a lot as an Unholy DK, but other than that, 5-yard extra reach may be okay for PvP, but we'll have to kind of see with that one. As for Defile, it is 9% to 8% AP damage. It looks like the shadow damage is or shadow frost damage is being converted into just pure shadow damage, and there's no mastery gain on it. So Defile is kind of being nerfed by 1%. The damage is being changed, and we don't get any mastery from it. So Defile is kind of like being nerfed, but at the same time, obviously the AoE needed to be nerfed since you got such a huge AoE buff coming into this with those talents. Gosh, I'm excited to try these out. Ebon Fever dot damage decreased by 5%. Again, with the AoE of Epidemic coming out, obviously we can see that there's got to be some main AoE reduction. Otherwise, Unholy DKs are going to deal some massive pressure going into the next expansion. Alright, what do we got next? We got Inevitable Doom, which sudden doom now triggers 15% more often and stacks up to 2 times. It's going to be replacing where the original Epidemic is. It's one of the new talents that we're discussing. That'll be cool to look at. As for the next ability, we got Infected Claws is now replacing Ebon Fever in the first tier. Ebon Fever moved, as we saw in the talents, which is not really huge news, but it's going to change rotation playstyle a little bit. As for Necrosis, damage dealing with Death Coil causes your next Scourge Strike to deal 40% increased damage. Is now 35% increased damage, and it's removed and replaced with Defile. Wait, how is there? Did they just move Necrosis? I gotta check the actual talents for that a little bit later on to figure out what was going on with that, because it says it's removed, but at the same time it's decreased by 5%. I mean, they wouldn't decrease it if it wasn't actually still in play. That really wouldn't make a lot of sense. So I can imagine it's still somewhere, but who knows where exactly it's located. I don't know. That's a little confusing. The last, or not last thing, we still got quite a few things we need to talk about. Next thing we're going to talk about is Pestilent Pustules. Every 8 festering wounds you burst, you gain 1 rune, which is obviously where it was to begin with. And bursting a festering wound now has a 10% chance to grant you runic corruption, which runic corruption was, I believe, haste that decreased the cooldown of your runes. So that'll be interesting to see. We haven't seen that ability talked about or come out in quite some time. As for the next talent, we got Darken Fusion, which is now, I believe it's replacing, it doesn't say which one is replacing, but we know which one it's replacing. It's one of the level 100 talent tools. I think it's Dark Arbiter. The Transformation lasts 5 seconds longer. I talked about that a little bit earlier, that was going to be in play. And Death Coil reduces the remaining cooldown of Dark Transformation by an additional 3 seconds. So that's pretty cool to look at. That'll actually make Darken Fusion, the Dark Transformation, a lot more reoccurring, and also make it last the maximum of 20 seconds, which could be an increase to a lot of AoE pressure, while not specking, of course, in a Gargoyle would be a fairly big damage nerf to your single target pressure. As for Soul Reaper, dealing 10% attack power, shadow damage over 6 seconds. If the enemy dies while affected by Soul Reaper, you gain 10% haste for 8 seconds. So it looks like they're slightly scaling the attack power different. And if it dies, you gain 10% haste, which I believe is a buff from what it used to be. It used to be slightly lower than that. As for the next talent, we got Spell Eater. Your anti-magic shell used to gain 20% extra magic damage, is now going to be buffed up to 30% extra magic damage with this ability, and last 5 seconds longer. So you get a longer and you get a stronger anti-magic shell, which could be fairly well for PvP and arena situations for Unholy Death Knights. As for the next talent, we got Unholy Blight, which 6 seconds stinging all enemies within the target nearby, infecting them with unholy disease that deals 100% of attack power damage over 15-second cooldown change, from 1.5 minute cooldown to 1 minute cooldown. So every minute you can get a major AoE talent and completely dot up everything very simply with that ability. Now I'm kind of questioning what it means by with an unholy disease. Are they talking about the literal unholy disease? Are they talking about virulent plague? Because it used to apply multiple diseases on a target. I believe it was like the blood plague and the frost plague, which, I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense that Unholy could do that. I guess it kind of does since there are insects doing it, but overall, I don't know. It's going to be an interesting talent to look at coming as soon as they update that, and seeing exactly what that disease is, whether it's going to be a new one or it's going to be the same one. Because if it's the same one, if it's that disease, then we just threw on the targets, is there really going to be much use for it? I guess it reapplies it, but if you really needed to reapply Outbreak, you could just kind of do that yourself. So that's kind of interesting to see. And as for the last talent we got to talk about, it is Unholy Frenzy. It incites you into a killing frenzy for 12 seconds, increasing your haste by 20% and causing your auto attacks to inflict the target with festering runes, which is going to replace the Defile category, which was on it's a 1.25 minute cooldown, and it's gonna be pretty insane. I mean, obviously 20% haste is gonna be ridiculous for dot damage, single target pressure, and AoE if used. And since it's on such a low cooldown, probably gonna be able to use it quite a lot, since it's changing from just kind of like a passive talent into a major cooldown talent. Now, that's probably the reason why they changed up Gargoyle a little bit, because Gargoyle being on a 3 minute cooldown and that being on a 1.25 plus Apocalypse being on like a 1.5 minute cooldown, it's going to give Unholy a lot more consistency within fights if you're speccing into obviously these lower cooldown changes with the talents. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and are pretty stoked for the new upcoming Unholy DK talent / spec that we're going to be seeing on the Battle for Azeroth beta very soon. Remember to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, if you like these news updates on DKs. Subscribe for more DK content, and until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.